Welcome back, everybody. Bienvenidos a todos. What an exhilarating morning. I have been popping in and out of sessions and seeing this wonderful learning and sharing, compartiendo. Just an amazing day of being together. Thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you to our full team for their great support. We have had a great day too of our Summer Dual Language Immersion Institute en Español y en Inglés. It's going really fast. We just have one more day left. Remember, next year we're going to be together in person and in July in Newport Beach, and we hope you'll join us then as well. As we get started for this afternoon session to close us out for day 2, I just want to remind you of our urgent action that we mentioned earlier today. It's around SB 237, Senate Bill 237 in the California State Senate. We urge you to oppose that bill and to sign on to the link that Vanessa has put into our chat. It's really easy to do. It gives you a little bit more information there as well. Reach out to CABE or California Together if you have any questions on that. But let's all come together to oppose Senate Bill 237. We need as many people as possible to sign on by next Monday, June the 28th. I'm really excited to share too, and just really grateful for the sponsorship and support of Caslon Publishing. You have heard mentioned in our morning session that you will all have access to Ofelia Garcia's book on the translanguaging classroom that she co-authored with several others. Caslon has offered to any of the participants at the CABE Summer Dual Language Immersion Institute an access link for 60 days to have access to this book online. You will be receiving that access link next Monday, June the 28th, in your email from Caslon Publishing. So mark it on your calendars. Make sure on Monday you check in your inbox. Maybe your clutter, maybe your spam. Sometimes that happens to emails that come into mine as well. But be looking for the access link that you'll have for the Translanguaging Classroom book by Caslon Publishing, and you'll have access to that for 60 days. What a generous offer. Thank you so much, Rebecca Field. Thank you, Marisol, and the whole team at Caslon for your support. In our morning session too, but when Rebecca introduced Dr. Garcia, she mentioned 4 books in the Caslon bundle. They have kind of like a biliteracy bundle, which is really great. Some had asked for the titles of those books and where to access them. Thanks, Vanessa. I saw you just put them up in the chat. You're able to see the collection from Caslon on supporting biliteracy instruction in the classroom and the website that you can use to purchase any of those books. You can also purchase the Translanguaging Classroom book there, but you may be lucky because today in our raffle, we will be raffling off several copies, actual copies, hardbook copies of the Translanguaging Classroom in our raffle at the end of today's session as well. So good luck to you on that, but if you're not able to have access to that through the raffle, we encourage you to look at the Caslon site and purchase this book or any other books that they have there as well. So now, today we really are here today for this powerful Q&A session with Dr. Ofelia Garcia. If you're like me, my mind was opened up with different thinking and questions and wanting to dialogue more on this. We thank you for all your questions, and leading us today and facilitating our question and answer time will be just another pillar in the field of dual language immersion. I'm really pleased today to introduce to you Dr. Cristina Alfaro. Cristina has served on our CABE Board of Directors as our Director of Secondary and Institutes of Higher Education. And she is actually departing from our Board of Directors as she's kind of reached her term limit for that. But we appreciate and value Cristina's work so much. Cristina, and could we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Cristina is currently the associate dean. Oh, let me start that over. Cristina is the associate vice president for international affairs at San Diego State University. You know her work. She has really just been an amazing researcher, educator, practitioner in the field of dual language education. And she led for many years the dual language education department at San Diego State, really creating one of our most robust teacher education programs for biliteracy teachers and receiving their BCLAT or bilingual authorizations. And so it just gives me a great pleasure to introduce you today, my colleague, my friend, Dr. Cristina Alfaro. Cristina?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. As Jan mentioned, bilingual education, dual language education has been at the center of my work, my research, and my love, and my passion. So to have the opportunity to lead a dialogue with someone that I admire so much and that I've learned so much from, Dr. Ofelia Garcia, is a real pleasure today. This morning's session during Dr. Ofelia Garcia's keynote, I know that you all have felt what I felt, and that's fortified and with this expanded knowledge and thinking and capacity to serve our bilingual dual language students in a more powerful way. I know that my mind was expanded. And one of the things that I really appreciated that Dr. Garcia mentioned that I think is really critical, that I've been thinking about a lot, is that we cannot take the word bilingual out of dual language education. And I like what you said, Dr. Garcia, about that if we keep bilingual, it keeps the history of the struggle, it keeps that el compromiso to the bilingual movement. So I just really want to continue to advocate for that, and I'm very happy for that reminder. And also, when you said languaging is what we do. So these are two key things that new things. I always learn something new when you speak, that I want to just really latch onto. But today we have an opportunity to interact with Dr. Garcia with the question and answer. And one of the things that Jan mentioned is that there were many questions in the chat regarding resources and books and consejos. So all that has been put on the chat by Vanessa. So make sure that you access that so that you all can take a look at that. So those answers will be answered there. Those questions will be answered there. But let's go ahead and start with our questions, because we have very little time and we have lots of really good questions. The first question, Dr. Garcia, that we have from our audience is, how do we balance out the prestige of the languages when experimenting with transfer in the dual language classroom to protect against the hegemony of English, which tends to have more power in this society?
Thank you, Cristina, for dialoguing with me. I think I'm really honored to be part of this dialogue with you, because I think it's in our dialogue where we expand each other's work. And I've learned also a lot from you. Así que muchas gracias. I think the issue of prestige is very important, but precisely, I think one of the things that translanguaging does is that it works against the linguistic hierarchies that we have established and that nation states and power have given us. So I do think that it's very important, and I hope that you all understood me this morning when I said that Carla was following the language policy of the state. In other words, she really thought about the language of the day and what she was doing, but within those spaces, then she opened up a space for more flexibility in order to be inclusive of everyone. So I think the issue is not of balance, but of equity, in the sense of not being always the same, but being open to everybody's practices. And I think that's what's really important. I think if you think about it just as balance, again, what you're thinking about is English on one side and Spanish on the other. And I want to remind you that many of our Latinx students, at least here in New York City, and I'm sure it's even more complex where you're from, are speakers of other languages besides Spanish. We have many Mixteco speakers in New York City. We have many Quechua and Quichua speakers. And I think that is the idea. The idea is to be able to value everybody's practices. So I don't think that the balance is as important. All of us who grow up in bilingual homes and bilingual communities know that the balance is not important. What is important is to be able to select the features that are important for that interaction, right, Cristina? So I think that's what that is about. How do you get the students to really acknowledge this fluidity of practices, and at the same time, make visible the fact that they have this unitary repertoire. And I think that's the only way to protect against the hegemony of English, to be able to make people understand that that Latinx students are much more than just speakers of English and of Spanish. And that dual language students, bilingual students, are also much more than just English and Spanish. I mean, I know that we talk all the time about Spanish language learners, and yet when you think about those children, they're not all white monolingual students. They're speakers of Arabic, they're speakers of Urdu, they're African-American students who have other language practices. So I think what's really important is to be able to have that in mind, the idea that you're validating all of these practices and that one is not more important than the other.
Okay, thank you very much. I know that it's a constant struggle. I know that another teacher was asking, just that, how do you work with this, la dinámica de poder que surge en un programa? So there's this tension that exists.
Absolutamente, siempre, ¿no? En nuestras comunicaciones siempre hay esta tensión, que hablamos, que seleccionamos, por qué, ¿no? Pasa en la familia, pasa cuando hablamos tú y yo, pasa en todas partes cuando hay comunidades bilingües que se tienen que comunicar. Yo creo que lo importante es para el maestro saber que hay una diferencia entre el proceso y el producto. Yo creo que como maestros a veces tenemos que decir, bueno, ahora vamos a producir an essay, a lecture, whatever, en una lengua o la otra. But to remember that the process that we engage in is a process that brings together all our resources. That's why I always say that there are no monolingual texts if you are bilingually involved with the text, right? You may be reading in English, but that doesn't mean that you're reading in English, right? You're reading yourself in the text. And the way that you read yourself in the text, the way that you engage in the text is precisely by bringing all the resources. Así que yo creo que la diferencia entre proceso y producto es bien importante. Y es bien importante para la maestra planear cuándo es que el producto va a ser en una lengua o la otra, pero porque al fin y al cabo eso es lo que hace la escuela. La escuela extiende ese repertorio, pero al mismo tiempo darse cuenta que it's impossible for a bilingual child to engage with any text, whether it's oral or written. By the way, it's impossible for any of us as bilinguals, right, to read in one language and not to bring to bear in our reading all that we are. It's impossible. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to make sense of the text.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's excellent, and it's so true. It reminds me of one of our colleagues, George Bunch, that talks about the language of ideas, the language of creation, and then the language of display. So once again, the process and the product. So I think that we just really need to hone in on that.
Yeah, I think I heard you say that one time. You talked about the language in which you create ideas, which you ideate, right? And that different from, what did you call it? The other one, the language of creation, or the language of?
Oh gosh. The language of ideas and the language of display.
Okay, all right, that's great. That's great.
So in the end, right, what is the goal? What is the ultimate goal? And the process is how you get there, right? And that could be different for many children, depending on the repertoire that they have or that they bring to school.
Right, absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah. So along with that, Ofelia, I know that, many teachers, many maybe that are here today, have not really tried to attempt translanguaging because again, there's a lot of cautionary notes and so on and so forth. But my question to you here is, for teachers that have not attempted translanguaging in the classroom, what would you say are the 3 or 4 things that they would need to consider to intentionally put translanguaging into practice in their classroom and to be effective?
Those are great questions. So I think the first thing always is to be able to observe the children, right? What is it that the kids are doing as they are interacting, not in the classroom where you have actually guided the way in which they're supposed to interact, but how do they interact when they're in the hallway, when they're in recess? How do they interact with the family? And to be able to really listen with open ears so that you can really listen to the complexity and the way in which these bilingual children manage these resources. Sometimes they have a parent who doesn't speak English and they do that, or a brother that only wants to speak in Spanish and they do that. So it's wonderful to be able to listen to them and observe them with an open mind. And I think once you start doing that, because I think it's very important to remember that translanguaging is a theory, but it doesn't come from the head. It comes from practice. It comes from being in classrooms and in homes and in communities day after day, and knowing that the way in which we interact is a lot more fluid than the way in which I interact with monolinguals, for example. Aún al hablar contigo, Cristina, uno no sabe a veces por dónde voy, ¿no? So I think listening and observing to the community, right? Just to outside of the school walls, what happens outside of the school walls? I think the second thing is that I mentioned it this morning is to take small steps. One of the things that we always insisted, and by the way, I put in the link that I sent you of resources, the link to the project that I led for many years, the CUNY NICEP project, and that gives you a lot of teacher videos and guides that I think are important. But one of the things that we learned very early is you can't design any translanguaging lessons unless you have really developed a stance that this is the way that a bilingual community works, that this is the way that we use our languages, right? So, but then the question was, well, how do you develop the stance? One of the things that we were very conscious of from the very beginning, and you'll see it in our work, the tension in our work, was, well, we have to start at the very bottom. We have to start at, and I always say the first step that we took was we wanted the schools, we worked with 67 schools all around New York State. We wanted the schools to have just a multilingual welcome sign. That was very, very simple. It was a first step, but that then created the dynamics that made the community and the children more receptive of all of this. So for example, something that happened almost immediately was the mothers would come in to drop off the children when we had in-person instruction, and they would see that all of a sudden they were putting up this mural with bienvenidos, but in all the different languages, and they would say, oh, we speak Fula, and I'll put it in Fula, and all of a sudden the mothers were really involved in it. So I think that first slow steps are important to develop the stance, right? You can't do the design without the stance, and yet you have to start somewhere. So I would say that that's the second one. And I think the third one is to really think of this difference between two things. One is the question that we have been talking about, the proceso and the producto, but then the difference between having general language performances that are capable, right? Sometimes we have children who may have arrived yesterday and they don't speak English, but we know that they can tell a joke. We know that they can tell you a story. We know that they're you know, that they use language in ways that is going to facilitate the fact that they develop these features. And I think sometimes we as teachers get mixed up between these, because we're so focused on the features and the structure of language, we think that that is what language is. And I think that thinking about language in broader terms, so you're thinking about language not as the language of school, but as a language of the child. I think that's a very big difference, right? To think of the language as done by the child, done by the person, instead of thinking of language as something that's outside of the person, right? And I would say that those are 4 steps that are important to take.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Because I know this is a question that we get asked a lot, is like, where do you even start? And I really love, especially the part about taking a stance, because you have to believe it. You have to be committed to it. You have to understand it to be able to take that stance. And then it helps you to move forward with it. So I appreciate that. Another question that we have along these lines is, if you could give a little bit of further detail in how translanguaging looks in students' writing. You know, how do you manage that?
Okay, well, I always, if you want to understand students' writing from a translanguaging perspective, we want to start somewhere else. So Dang Fu, who is a Chinese language literacy scholar, worked many years ago in Chinatown here in New York City. And she would show me, she would say, well, the only way to get the students, these Chinese newcomers, to write is if they write. So some of them can only write in Chinese. Some of them can write in English with a lot of Chinese. Some of them can write in English with less Chinese. Some of them can write in English without Chinese. So again, I think that we go back to the idea that you, Christina, proposed earlier about language to have ideas, to create, right? And if writing is about, you have to have ideas that you want to put down. You can't edit a blank page, right? So in order to do that, you have to use all of your repertoire. Again, you want to be clear about what the producto is. What is the objective? What are you moving them towards? Are you moving them towards writing an essay in Spanish only? Are you moving them towards writing an essay in English only? But in the process of doing that, they will have to use other resources, both their language and, Google Translate. I always say, I've been doing Tai Chi with Chinese women that don't speak English, and we communicate perfectly using Google Translate. If I didn't have Google Translate, I would be unable to speak, to communicate with them. We become very good friends. And I always think we are so hung up on, no, we can't do it that way, that we don't allow the children to use the resources that they have and that they have at their disposal that we can use. So again, otra vez, it's a difference between the process and the product. And having said that, then making sure that the children are working juntos, right, together. Because if you have a collaborative group that is writing, and they're writing an essay that is eventually going to be in Spanish, for example, they will be able to help each other, and they will be able to then come up with something that is as much as possible in one language or the other. But I wouldn't be surprised or alerted in any way if they are producing, if they just do not have enough features to express themselves in English, let's say, to have Spanish in their writing until they can do it without it. So I think that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it goes back to valuing what they bring, right? The repertoire that they bring. And so in doing so, you're able to just help them along the way. Okay, wow, I can't believe we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you one last question that's going to be pretty quick to answer. And that is the term for translanguaging emergence has a term for translanguaging emerged that in Spanish that has your support. So inquiring minds want to know, you know, is it translenguar o cómo lo dirías tú?
Yo creo que me he dado por vencida, le digo translenguar. Yo creo que es lo que la mayoría de la gente empieza a decir. I think it's the closest. Cuando no me dicen que no, I put it down first as translanguaging, and then sometimes they say, no, pero en español, bueno, translenguar. Pero I try to get it in English because that's what makes sense to me, you know, and I do think, I'll give you an example. Just last week, we were writing an article, and the reviewer said, you have to translate all the words in Spanish into English. And I reread it and I thought, okay, the only two words that I find are tortilla and masa, or nada. And anybody, any New Yorker would know masa and nada if they lived in the world, you know, these are not Spanish words. Those are words of my words, right? But we always want to make sure that words are, you know, that we're here or there. But, you know, I think the important thing is to remember that those of us who grow up in this bilingual context live, and I think this is where Gloria Saldúa is still so important, because she made us realize that we live in these borderlands, in these entre mundos, in this Nepantla that she called it, that are neither here nor there. Ella dice que no es ni águila ni serpiente, no me acuerdo qué más, ¿no? Pero, and she says, es como el océano, like the ocean that doesn't have an end. And that's the way in which we live and the way in which we language. I think we have to get our students to perform using just certain features, because that's life, right? So when they speak to monolinguals, either here or in Mexico, they have to use only half of their repertoire. But I think as educators, we have to know that it's not bad. It's not that we are speaking improperly, inappropriately. It's just what we do with language in a bilingual community.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Ofelia, and to everyone that's here with us today for this time, for this robust dialogue. I know that we could go on and on for hours because there's so much to talk about. But at this point, you know, we do have to stop, and we'll just have an opportunity to build on this work and the thoughts that you've shared with us today.